Say the words Vietnam War in any room of history enthusiasts and watch the arguments ignite instantly. Was America justified? What went wrong? Could victory have ever been possible? But almost no one asks the harder question. What did the war look like from the other side of the jungle? What did the Vietnamese people actually want? And how did they endure nearly 2 decades of merciless guerrilla warfare against the most powerful military on Earth? This is their side of the story, and the stubborn, unbreakable will that let them outlast a superpower. To understand that will, you have to understand what came before it. For 1,000 years, China tried to swallow Vietnam whole, through conquest, then through slow cultural erosion. By the 19th century, as European empires carved up Asia, Chinese influence finally began to fade, and for one brief moment it looked as though Vietnam might stand on its own. Then French warships arrived. The ruling Nguyen dynasty, hopelessly outmatched, folded almost immediately, and by 1884 most of the country had been absorbed into French Indochina. The imperial court became a hollow puppet, while French colonial governors ruled with near-total impunity, brutal enough that simply calling yourself Vietnamese in the wrong context could be treated as a crime. Decades of failed uprisings and horrific reprisals followed, and the peasantry, crushed under colonial rule, grew desperate for anything resembling salvation. That salvation wasn't forming in the rice paddies. It was forming in the coffee houses of Paris, where a small number of Vietnamese students, lucky enough to afford a Western education, were absorbing a radical new idea: communism. It promised freedom from exactly the kind of imperial exploitation crushing their homeland, and it spread through Vietnam's underground political scene like wildfire, becoming the dominant resistance ideology by the early 1930s. At the center of that movement stood the son of a disgraced bureaucrat, a man the world would come to know as Ho Chi Minh. He left Vietnam in the 1910s and drifted through Europe, absorbing anti-imperialist politics wherever he went. By 1918, he had traveled as far as the United States and, by some accounts, Britain as well. In 1919, he petitioned the French government for Vietnamese independence at Versailles. A year later, watching Lenin's Bolsheviks seize power in Russia, he saw living proof that empires could be broken by force. In 1930, he chaired the founding meeting of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party with one singular goal: end colonial rule over his homeland for good. But the regime change he'd spent his life working toward wouldn't come from Vietnamese hands first. It would come from Imperial Japan. Japan invaded in 1940, folding Vietnam into its so-called Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, and by 1945 had formally annexed the country, expelling the French administration entirely. Months later, Japan surrendered to the Allies, and a century of colonial order collapsed overnight, leaving raw chaos in its place. Ho Chi Minh, who had returned in 1941 to build a resistance army called the Viet Minh, now commanded at least 10,000 armed guerrillas. He struck on August 15, 1945, before the ink on Japan's surrender had even dried. With French forces still disarmed from the Japanese occupation, the Viet Minh had a brief, unprecedented window with the entire country wide open in front of them. And in that window, Ho Chi Minh did something almost nobody expects. He didn't turn against the West. He turned toward it, desperate for American friendship. U.S. intelligence officers had already been working directly with the Viet Minh, and Ho's refusal to prioritize communist-class warfare over simple national liberation, first patriotism, not yet communism, as he put it, left both Stalin and Mao deeply suspicious of him, even as it won him quiet sympathy from American observers watching an oppressed people try to throw off their chains. On September 2, 1945, Ho Chi Minh stood before a massive crowd and declared the birth of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, opening with words borrowed straight from America's own founding documents. OSS Major Archimedes Patty stood on the podium behind him. As his speech ended, a U.S. aircraft flew overhead and the crowd erupted. For one fleeting moment, America was seen as a liberator, and it looked as if history might bend toward friendship between East and West. It didn't. France wanted its colony back, and Washington had no appetite for legitimizing an openly communist government. Negotiations collapsed, and on December 16, 1946, the First Indochina War began. France propped up a puppet emperor and fought for 8 grinding years, backed increasingly by American money, until their catastrophic defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 forced them to the negotiating table. The resulting settlement split Vietnam in two, Communist North and a separate state in the South, where Emperor Bao Dai was quickly shoved aside by his own prime minister, Ngo Dinh Diem. Diem declared a republic through a referendum so blatantly rigged it barely qualified as theater, then broke France's promise of a future reunification vote entirely. When northern-backed insurgents began appearing across the South in response, Diem grew more repressive, more anti-communist, and more reliant on American backing, even while routinely defying American advice on nearly everything else. By 1963, Washington had had enough. Diem was assassinated in a military coup quietly assisted by the CIA. Combined with the Gulf of Tonkin incident the following year, the door swung open for full-scale American military intervention. From the very first day, North Vietnamese commanders understood something crucial. They could never beat America in a conventional fight, so they didn't try to. Instead, they leaned on a rural insurgency already loyal to the northern-backed National Liberation Front, the Viet Cong, who fought alongside the North Vietnamese army in a grinding campaign that outpaced Saigon's disorganized forces until American troops flooded in en masse in 1965, transforming the conflict into a brutal war of attrition. Underground, the Vietnamese built something closer to a hidden civilization than a military network. Over 200 miles of tunnels threading beneath the battlefield, the largest system stretching just 20 miles from Saigon itself at Cu Chi. One North Vietnamese commander later put the stakes in stark terms. Lose the tunnels and you lose the war, so not 1 centimeter would be surrendered without a fight to the death. The cost of that resolve was staggering, but the tunnels held. 2 years into American involvement, the bombing campaigns expanded across the North in a deliberate effort to break the population's will. One villager in Quang Binh province watched the first American bombers open their bays overhead and, in his confusion, wondered aloud why a mother airplane was dropping baby airplanes. He had never seen anything like it. He survived, fled with his family into the caves, and later told a journalist that no one in his village understood why Americans had come to attack a country that had done nothing to them. But American bombs weren't the only horror waiting for Vietnamese civilians. As Viet Cong fighters embedded themselves among the rural population, U.S. forces began designating entire villages as free fire zones. The consequences reached their bloodiest point on March 16, 1968, at My Lai, where American soldiers massacred at least 347 unarmed civilians. A handful of lives were saved only by the intervention of a horrified American helicopter crew who turned their guns on their own countrymen to stop the killing. My Lai remains the single worst atrocity committed by U.S. forces during the entire war. The war brutalized Vietnamese soldiers just as thoroughly as it brutalized civilians, largely because of how long they were expected to serve. One Army surgeon, Le Cao Dai, head of surgery at a military hospital, recalled being told he'd be deployed south for 6 months. He stayed for 8 years. Deployments that long hardened soldiers past the point of mercy, especially toward captured American pilots, whose indiscriminate bombing runs made them among the most despised men in the entire conflict. Many who bailed out over Vietnamese territory were tortured to death by the people they'd just bombed. To keep civilian morale from collapsing under the weight of endless war, the DRV ran a relentless and highly effective propaganda machine, spearheaded by legendary commander Vo Nguyen Giap, who had fought at Ho Chi Minh's side since the 1940s. Newspapers sold out instantly. Loudspeaker broadcasts drew crowds hungry for any word from the front. With almost no outside news to contradict the message, Northern civilians came to see the war as a righteous struggle against yet another imperial invader, a stark contrast to the South, where urban populations had access to foreign broadcasts and far more conflicted feelings about the bloodshed tearing their country apart. That propaganda machine proved its worth after the Tet Offensive of 1968, which blindsided American forces completely. In the chaos, Viet Cong commandos breached the grounds of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon itself, opening fire with rocket-propelled grenades on the very heart of American power in the South. The embassy held, but the psychological damage was already done. If Saigon wasn't safe, nowhere was. The offensive shattered what remained of Southern confidence in their own government, even as American morale back home began to crumble alongside it. By the early 1970s, both sides were exhausted, but only one side was breaking. American soldiers were deserting and openly ignoring orders in record numbers, while the DRV held firm. Washington poured resources into propping up the South Vietnamese army, while quietly withdrawing its own broken troops. But the effort was too little, far too late. In 1975, the Ho Chi Minh campaign tore through the defenses around Saigon and brought the Republic of Vietnam crashing down. After nearly 20 years of war and millions dead, the North had won. Or had it? The North Vietnamese survived and reunified their country against odds almost no one gave them. But the war left millions on both sides permanently scarred, and communism never spread across Southeast Asia the way Washington's domino theory had predicted, rendering decades of American strategic obsession pointless in hindsight. Despite years of direct contact with Ho Chi Minh and repeated warnings from its own intelligence officers in the 1940s, America never fully understood that it wasn't communism driving Vietnamese resistance. It was the same desire for liberty America itself was built on. That failure of understanding, cemented by years of propping up a corrupt and increasingly authoritarian ally in the South, tore open a wound between North and South Vietnam that, decades later, still hasn't fully healed.